Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's episode of Intuitive Angling, and really appreciate you guys making some time out of your day to hang with me and check the video out. Always appreciate that. And guys, today we're going to be talking about one of the most commonly asked questions I get as far as fishing techniques, and that is how to choose between using a jig or a soft plastic lure. A lot of people don't really know when you should do either one of those, so we're going to give you guys some good tips and advice situationally when a jig will outproduce and when a soft plastic will outproduce in today's video. Also, guys, I just want to remind you about the Father's Day sale we got going on at SolarBat with my RB2 and RB3 series sunglasses. If you guys would like to get a pair for Father's Day or gift for somebody for Father's Day, you can get them at 25% off between now and Father's Day. I'll put the SolarBat link in the description if you guys would like to get you a pair there. So much appreciated with that. Okay, guys, I get this question a lot. A lot of times from people that are not necessarily new to the sport, but they are, haven't been in it a long time, and they're trying to determine the best lure categories, and they just don't know when to use a jig versus a soft plastic, because most of the time when you're talking about fishing a soft plastic like a creature bait like this Zoom Z-Hog or like a plastic worm or something like that, you're fishing them in the same situations that you would any type of a jig setup. Jigs and Texas rig soft plastics, I don't care if they're a creature bait or a worm or Cinco or lizard or anything like that, you can fish them in the exact same cover, the exact same type of cover. And for the most part, that can be anywhere between fishing, docks, lay down trees, grass beds, deeper off deeper points. You can fish them about anywhere, anytime the fish are on the bottom, you can pretty much fish either or of these. So the question is how do you determine which is going to be the best selection for you in terms of what your expectations or what your goals are? Now, one of the things that you have to decide when you're trying to decide whether to go with a jig or a soft plastic is, are you after quality? Are you after trying to catch bigger fish? Or are you just trying to catch numbers? Or maybe a little bit of both? So that's a determining factor with that. Now, as a tournament angler, you're always wanting to try to catch the biggest 5 fish that you can. And as a recreational angler, you may just want to, just get bit, that type of thing. In general, we'll start with the foundation, and then we'll get into some more details here. In general, you're going to get twice the bites on soft plastic. Let's say, for example, you and I were fishing boat docks, and we're pitching and flipping around boat docks. If you were using a creature bait or a worm or Cinco, and I was using a jig, like a full-size jig like this right here, you're going to get twice the bites that I do on a soft plastic lure versus a jig, simply because the profile on soft plastic lures is a little bit more subtle, and they're a little bit more diverse as far as the water displacement and the profile that you have on there, because you got some small diameter worms and you got your larger creature baits and everything in between. Then you can adjust the size of your soft plastic to accommodate that, whatever the fish are going to do. And another thing about soft plastics is you have a lot more of a color variation. Soft plastics, you got about any color that you want. You've got your natural colors, bright colors, dark colors. You got different types of glitter. You got different shades. And in jigs, you're pretty much relegated to whatever different type of silicone skirt colors you have and trailer colors. So you're a little bit more limited on colors. That's another reason why, in general, soft plastics will catch more fish. So here's sort of my determination on it. I think one of the biggest myths people have about making this thing, it's like they go by water temperature, and they say, okay, well, I need to use a jig in cold water because they're more lifelike, and fish don't bite. Soft plastics is good in cold weather. That's not necessarily true. And they say the same for the summertime. It's like you don't want to use a jig in the middle of the summertime, like for pitching and flipping, because a soft plastic works better. That's not necessarily true. For me, guys, the thing that I have found in my determination, and I have fished a bunch of these exclusively. In fact, probably 75 to 80% of the tournaments I've ever won in my career, including my Bassmaster wins, have come on jigs. The thing that I have found out is that water clarity influences my decision more than anything else. It determines, the water clarity determines that even more than the water temperature or the type of cover that I'm fishing. For the most part, if I'm fishing some type of dirty water, I want a jig. If I can get by with fishing a jig in dirty water, I just feel like my odds go way up at getting more bites, or excuse me, getting bigger bites with a jig. I realize that I'm going to sacrifice a little bit if I go to a jig over soft plastic, but anytime that I'm in off-colored water, I prefer a jig. And not to say you can't catch them in off-colored water on soft plastics, because you can by going to dark. But that to me is when it excels. Anytime that I'm fishing shallow water cover, like laydowns, grass, docks, whatever like that, in dirty water, I want to try to catch them on a jig. And the same is true if you're fishing a little bit deeper water, because a lot of times, you're fishing jigs and soft plastics off of points and like dragging a football head jig. And say, for example, in the summertime, if you're fishing a main lake point, you got the choice between throwing the traditional big Texas rig worm, which a lot of people do, or maybe dragging a football head jig. Again, if I have a little bit more off-colored water, I will definitely go with the jig over the worm. But if the water visibility is like, a little bit cleaner, like over 3.5 foot or so, I do prefer a worm because of the color variations that I have on that. But one of the things besides that, it's like you sort of have to let the fish tell you what they want in that particular day. There's two things. You got to let the fish tell you what they want, and then also you have to know when to put down the jig and pick up something else, or vice versa. Now, here is what that I have found for the most part. It's like I will usually start out, if I'm fishing whatever that I'm fishing, whatever cover that I'm fishing, say for example, I'm up at Stockton Lake and I'm fishing flooded bushes, I will always start with a jig, simply because I want to find out the level of aggressiveness, and I know if I get some bites, they're going to be better. And then if I'm not getting bit, I may slow down and go to a soft plastics to try to determine if that's going to get me more bites. But more or less, one of the things that I found about jig fishing versus soft plastics is they like a jig and they bite a jig better if the fish are more aggressive and early and late in the day. So that's why in the lower light conditions, I like to fish a jig, simply because it has a bigger profile, the silhouette. And as the light intensity gets brighter, up during the day, that's usually when I'll move to my soft plastics. One of the things that I've noticed in my tournament fishing over the years is there was a period from about the mid 80s to the late 90s where I fished a jig a lot. It's like every tournament I went to, I was trying to get them pitching and flipping a jig. And usually I could figure it out, but inevitably this is what happened. I would find the fish with a jig, and the first day of the tournament, I would catch him on a jig. And then the second day of the tournament, it got tougher, and I'd usually have to go to some type of soft plastic, and I could keep catching the fish by going to the soft plastic. I remember one tournament I fished. Well, I'll tell you one of the Bassmaster tournaments I won at the Mobile Delta in Alabama. I was catching them on a jig throughout the whole tournament, and the last day of the tournament, they just got conditioned to it. And I wound up catching them on a little bitty 4-inch ringworm. Fish were still there, and my jig was going right past them, and they were seeing it, but they didn't want it. They wanted something a little bit more downsized. And that's one of the things that you have to understand about when you're fishing a slow bait like a jig or a plastic worm. You can't imagine how many fish are looking at that bait and never biting it. It's like when you're fishing this, if you come up to a good looking laydown, and say for example you're in a creek arm and you come up to a good looking laydown, you pitch that jig in that laydown, 99% of the time there's a bass living in that laydown somewhere. And I think a lot of times they go down on it and they'll study it and determine if they want to bite it or not. And anytime you're fishing a jig, I mean, look at that. That's a big commitment. It's like to hit a bait that's like 4 or 5 inches long, that big, that takes a big commitment for a fish. But if you have more of a downsized, subtle bait like that in a soft plastic, they're a lot more apt to hit it, under those conditions. So it's sort of like that never-ending balancing act about, bites versus quantity. So when you're fishing, when you're trying to make that determination, the only way that you can really make that determination is you've got to try both. You've got to have both rigged up. Now, if I'm in a pitching and flipping situation, or if I'm in an offshore dragging football head jig fishing deep point deal, I always have both on. I have a jig on and I have some type of a soft plastic. I usually have some type of a jig with different profile, different trailers, different size, and then I'll have my soft plastics. I'll have something like a creature bait, and then I'll have a worm profile. Profile, when it comes to soft plastics, is so critical because the profile that a bass prefers is determined by a lot of different variables. It's determined by the time of year, the size of the fish that you're fishing for, the sunlight conditions, the wind, the water clarity, the water temperature, time of day, type of cover, everything like that. And so much of the stuff in bass fishing, it's like, I can't sit here and tell you, it's like, okay, you need to fish a jig in this situation here, and you need to fish a plastic worm in this situation. It's not that easy. You can have a foundation and you can have something to begin with, but you usually always wind up making some type of an adjustment, one way or the other with that. I'll give you another prime example about how you determine this. I was fishing, actually last year I was fishing up at Lake Stockton up there where I fish a lot for fun, and there was a lot of flooded bushes and trees in the water. And I was catching them on a green pumpkin jig, and I was getting a lot of bites. I was getting as many bites as you could get, as if you would have went to some type of a soft plastic. And I wound up catching my five best fish weighed about 14 or 15 pounds. And I went out there the next day, the same type of a deal, and I wanted to experiment a little bit, and I started fishing the brush hog and the Z hog, the creature bait, in the same type of water. And I wound up getting just as many bites, but my best five weighed about 9 pounds. So a lot of times it's just, you don't really know what the fish want one way or the other till you just experiment with it. So main thing, guys, is to be flexible, experiment with either or, experiment with colors, experiment with weights. All that type of stuff has an impact in it, but ultimately you just have to let the bass tell you what you want, and you have to really determine what your expectations are for the day. I'm the type of an angler where I've got a tournament mentality, so I'm always thinking about the quality fish and how I'm going to catch bigger ones. So that's why I go with the jig more. But if I'm doing like an on the water lesson and I'm wanting to teach somebody how to get a lot of bites or a certain technique, I'll always have them fishing a soft plastic. I won't give them a jig because they're not going to get near the bites on it. That's some sort of, I think a jig is sort of an advanced technique a little bit in the terms of, it's advanced because you're simply not going to get the bites on it as you will most of the time on a soft plastic. So first thing that you have to do to get confidence in any technique, whether it be a jig or soft plastic, is you got to get some bites on it. So once you get a few bites on it, then you have confidence to stay with it over and over. But probably a lot of it also is how you were raised fishing, because I had the chance early on to do a lot of jig fishing, because back when I started fishing, people didn't fish plastics near as much as they did jigs. It was back then in the late 70s, it was all about a black jig with a black pork frog on it. And that's how, and I had some good days on it. And I fished with anglers that were experts at that. And I saw how effective a jig was. So that gave me a lot of confidence in it. But anymore, I'll be honest with you guys, the jig fishing is a dying art. I mean, I have seen a lot of it. There's so many different type of lures out there, and there's so many type of, the soft plastic technology has evolved so much in the fishing industry that jigs get overlooked a bunch. You simply don't have the jig fishermen like you did 30 or 40 years ago, and you definitely don't have the same quality of jig fishermen. So anyway, guys, hope that answers a few questions, gives you some insight in that. If I could give you just one tip more than anything else, is if you have a lake that has water visibility of under about 1.5 feet, really try to get them on a jig, or try to start with a jig at least. And if your water visibility is clear, go with the soft plastics. It just seems like that'll help out a little bit. So anyway, hope it helps you guys catch a few. We'll talk later.